Welcome to the Women in STEM podcast, where we explore the exciting world of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics through the eyes of inspiring women who are here to shape the future. I am your host, Kelly Shungu, and I have a background in engineering. And today we're going to be diving into the dynamic world of technology, and we'll be discussing the tech job industry, especially with regards to 2025. I have TechTalk UK here with me, and I'm really looking forward to how they're going to teach us. And I think this episode will be great for people who are new to the industry as well as seasoned professionals. So let's get started. Welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I can go first. So, my name is Joana. I am originally from Brazil, but I've been living in London for the past 8 years. Basically, came here to study. That's actually how we met. We met at university. Then we went to live in China together. And then after that, came back to the UK, graduated, and have been here ever since. So, right now, I'm currently leading the growth marketing team at a fintech startup here in London. And yeah, that's a little bit about myself. And then about a year ago, we decided to start Tech Talk. So that's why we're here. So basically, we saw this huge gap because I work in marketing, and Roxanne, you're going to know in a little bit, she works in RevOps. But we saw this huge gap in the market now that when you talk about tech, a lot of people think about like software engineers and basically coding roles. And we saw a very big gap, especially coming out of university, of like no one talks about the non-coding side of tech, like marketing, sales, revenue operations, like finance. So we saw this massive gap, and then we decided like we want to spread the word about it, and that's why we decided to start Tech Talk like about a year ago, and yeah, have been doing it ever since.
Yeah, and my name's Roxanne. So first of all, thank you so much for having us. A really big fan of this podcast. My name's Roxanne. I'm half French, half from Cameroon, but grew up most of my life in Cape Town, South Africa. Moved to London 7 years ago, so around the same time as Joanna, to study at university, and then ever since leaving university, I've been basically stayed in London. And yeah, basically ever since leaving university, I've been working in the tech industry. My career hasn't been straightforward. I started in tech sales, then moved on to like go-to-market strategy, and then now I'm building out the revenue operations function at a fintech company. And throughout my career, I've learned a lot because I've worked at like startups, big tech, and scale up companies, and kind of like what it takes to stand out as an interviewee in order to basically, yeah, stand out in terms of like the skill sets that you need to showcase in order to really look forward to being, yeah, good in a startup versus big tech. So, yeah, it's been good so far.
Wow, I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to kind of get more into what inspired you to create Tech Talk UK, and if you can share some of the pivotal moments in your tech journey so far.
Yeah. I mean, Joanna touched upon it. So essentially the first reason, like the main reason we started Tech Talk is because we saw that there was a massive gap or just like a lack of knowledge about the opportunities that exist in the tech industry. As Joanna mentioned, she works in marketing, I work in revenue operations. And we were just noticing whenever we talk to people and we said, oh yeah, like we work in tech, the first thing that they would assume is that we were software engineers. They're like, oh, okay, nice. So like, how long have you been a software engineer or like a computer programmer? And it was just that assumption that people didn't even know that there's actually like a whole other side to the tech industry where you can, career switch and basically go in there without needing to have any of the technical skills that most people would assume. So we actually started Tech Talk with that aim to teach people about the non-coding side of tech and all of the opportunities that exist there. But then it really just grew like massively, as in now we help people kind of across all industries. We still are very much focused on tech, like naturally because of what we do as part of our jobs and just because of like the content that we share. Most people that come to us are interested about the tech industry. But yeah, like it's kind of just grown to not even just focusing on non-coding, but just like anything it takes to land a job in tech generally.
Wow, that's really cool. And I'm really curious about your background, Roxanne. I know that you've lived in 7 countries across 5 continents. How has your experience in living in different countries and cultures influenced your view on tech roles specifically and bridging a global divide?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe I can just provide a bit of a background in terms of that. So, As I mentioned, my mom's from France, my dad's from Cameroon. So I was born in France, but then my dad was working in Nottingham at the time. So after being born in France, like mom moved back to Nottingham to be with my dad. Then after like a year and a half of living in England, we moved to Alaska. Then we moved to Nigeria. Then we moved to South Africa at the age of 7. So that's where most of my life, like I spent in Cape Town, South Africa. And then after graduating, I moved to London, where we studied international business with languages. And then the languages that I learned were Mandarin and Spanish. So we spent 6 months in China and then 6 months in Argentina as well. So all very different countries in terms of like their technological evolution. And I think living in those different countries in terms of like just seeing how far technology can take you and also like the types of opportunities that you get through really helpful technology. I mean, for example, we lived in China. And I mean, I never had to take my wallet anywhere. Like whenever I moved to China, I didn't have a bag. I didn't need to take a wallet because everything was within your phone. And like most of everything actually you could do within one app, which is WeChat, which is kind of like a way better version of WhatsApp that is used in China. Like you can pay for your train tickets on there. Like you can make like you can message. Obviously, it's also like they have like a social media side to it. And then, for example, right after that, I moved to Argentina, where it was like the complete opposite. Like the technology wasn't as advanced, and so everything sometimes could be like a lot slower. So something as simple as booking an appointment with the doctor. I remember like because at the time like I had just had a knee surgery, so I needed to get like a physiotherapist in each one of those countries. And like the first thing that I did when I tried to get a hold of a doctor was that they were like, okay, cool, give me your WhatsApp number and we'll like book the reservation over WhatsApp. And to me that was so odd because usually like you either call and you make the reservation there, or you're able to book it online. So like something even as professional as booking like an appointment at the doctor and having that conversation over WhatsApp about how to make the payment was quite like an interesting juxtaposition. So yeah, I just think that there's like a lot of opportunity when it comes to tech, and like especially as these more developing countries continue to evolve with the use of AI and like all of the other technologies that are coming forward. I do think that we need to be a bit careful about like the divide that could be happening or that is going to happen across developing and developed countries, and just like how can we better encourage the learning and adoption of technology within these developing countries to make sure that they can also keep up to date with all of the trends.
That's really cool. Yeah, I've heard about WeChat before, but I didn't know that it could do so many cool things. That's really cool. I'm also curious because you've been working in the tech industry for over 5 years now, and I wanted to know if you foresee any specific trends that you believe will start happening in 2025 with regards to tech jobs.
Yeah, I mean, so, when I started working in tech, 2020, basically that's when we graduated. And already just between 2020 and 2025, I've seen like a lot of shifts because, as I mentioned, I've moved jobs quite a lot. So that means I was in the market at very different points. So when I first was in the market, that was in 2020, the market was so dry. I mean, that was literally when, COVID was happening, all countries were shutting down, nobody knew what was going on. So there was so much uncertainty. And finding a job, especially as a recent graduate, was very difficult within that specific year. I remember just like looking on LinkedIn every day and just not finding any roles even open to apply for because, there were so many companies doing furlough. There was just so much uncertainty that people just shut down rather than, wanting to hire more. So 2020, I remember, was like a very difficult year in terms of landing a role. But then the market opened up and actually all of that fear ended up turning into a lot of opportunity because tech companies in 2021 and 2022 did amazingly because of actually COVID, where, we couldn't. There was this huge push of having to move everything online. There was a lot of digital transformation projects where companies maybe had like a 5-year plan of it and needed to push it forward in order to stay competitive. So actually we saw this boom where the tech industry was doing extremely well. Any software company was really growing, especially, if they had a good product. And so now that meant that they were hiring at a very rapid pace. They had to hire tons of salespeople because they had a lot of demand because they were getting a lot of customers. So they hired a lot of salespeople, a lot of customer support, and they were even hiring a lot of roles that weren't necessarily like critical roles. So like in 2021, 2022, the tech market was booming, and they eventually overhired. That's what ended up happening because they knew that eventually the market was going to become stagnant or like more stable, but I don't think they truly predicted at which rate it was going to get stable. And so that's where we saw like end of 2022, beginning of 2023, that's when you started seeing like all of the mass layoffs. So like, you know, Salesforce, Amazon, Google, like when they were just laying off like tens of thousand people at once. That's when the market was opening up again. And so that need for like online maybe wasn't as critical as it was in 21 and 2022. And so that actually impacted me because at the time in 2022, I got a job at a big tech company. And they also ended up doing layoffs actually, like at the beginning of 2023. And I was laid off because my role wasn't critical. Like I was working in international go-to-market strategy, which is just not the most important role when you have like layoffs that you need to do. And that was also a tough time, to be honest, to be applying because of, again, the amount of uncertainty. But in another way, you basically had this massive boom and then it just dropped. And like, because so many tech companies were laying off, there were so many roles that were being frozen. I remember like in my first 2 weeks, I managed to land 9 interviews. And out of those 9 interviews, like 6 of them just dropped because there was either layoffs or there was role freezes. Now what we're seeing is that the job market is just more back to what it used to be like before 2020. But I think that because people had seen this boom, like they feel like it's worse than it was before, but it's actually basically the same, like in terms of like roles that are open. And I think in 2025, moving forward, it's going to stay stable. But I think like the strategy that candidates will need to use will need to be more strategic. Like you'll need to rely a lot on your network in order to get roles. Because like at the moment, there's a bit of a trend of companies not wanting to advertise roles as much because there's just somebody advertises a role, there's tons of people applying, and then it just takes a lot of time in order for them to find the right candidate. So I think moving forward, like people are going to have to rely a lot on their network and a lot of their personal brand in order to land roles rather than just the cold application that worked before 2020.
Yeah, the main issue we're seeing now as well, like with the market in 2024 and 2025, is that like the amount of companies hiring is more or less the same, but like the amount of applicants has like multiplied by like 10 because now, especially after COVID, like companies are hiring remote or hybrid, so people can apply from anywhere. So you see people like applying from all over the world wanting to come to the UK, coming to London. So there's so many applicants in the market now, which is completely crazy. And there's a lot of changes happening as well, like especially in like the technology side of it, like with the use of AI. So like even like creating resumes, creating cover letters, like basically is very easy for people to do it, but they don't do it well because again, it's all AI doing. So companies are going to have to focus a lot as well, like on the recruitment side of things, of like how to actually make this manageable, because what's happening now is that you have like 5,000 people applying for a job and you can't screen 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you make that smarter? And like, how are you able to actually like screen people in a way that is fair for everyone that is applying for the job and is not like sacrificing the people that are applying, but maybe like they were one of the last ones to apply and then they're never going to get seen. So
you mentioned during your opening around non-coding jobs, and I was wondering if you could just highlight a couple of them and just go into a bit more depth for people who might be curious and wanting to start a career in tech, but they are not very savvy when it comes to coding.
Yeah, there are a lot of non-coding roles. It's much more than coding, if you think about it. So, for example, I work in marketing. So I work in growth marketing. So it's anything related to acquiring new customers. So usually like you have marketing and sales working in parallel, especially if you're working at looking at B2B as well, like trying to get more customers in. Mm-hmm. But in B2C, like you see marketing everywhere, like in a banner on the train, or basically like how are we positioning our brand? And like, for example, like McDonald's, like how do you recognize McDonald's? McDonald's is all because of like the marketing behind it. And then you also have like the product side. So like if you have a product, like how is the product journey? So there are people like in UX, UI, they're focusing mainly on like making that journey as smooth as possible. So they have more people signing up to the platform. And then you're going to have roles like customer support, customer success as well, which is very related to managing current relationships. So customer success, you're going to be managing relationship with customers, or customer support is basically managing relationships with the users that are struggling, that like you need them to get a good review of your platform, and like you need to get them to have a good experience. So you need always to have really good support. Otherwise, people are not going to come back to your platform. And then you have like finance, and you have like even corporate law. So there's a room of possibilities. Like it doesn't matter what you like doing, like if you like being customer facing or if you like working on a spreadsheet, like there is going to be a role for you in tech. So it's about like finding where your skills lie and like what is a good fit for you based on what your skills and also like what you want to be doing on a day to day.
Yeah, definitely. I myself worked as a solutions engineer for a tech company, and I had no idea that this role existed before, but it was perfect for me because I had done my degree in engineering and my master's in engineering, technology, and business management. And being a solutions engineer enabled me to be customer facing, but also have that technical element. So I definitely would recommend to the viewers to explore and be curious about the roles that are out there
Yeah.
because there's so many opportunities. I wanted to know, like, could you share some insight on what type of effective strategies you see evolving into the tech industry with regards to hiring and what to be expecting in 2025?
Yeah, it's a little bit like Rox was saying as well, where networking is key. So the reason why networking is key, and I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that what I was saying about the amount of applicants right now. So like you post a job, you're going to have 5,000 people applying for the job. So realistically, the recruiter is not going to look at those 5,000 profiles. Usually they have like a goal of like the amount of candidates they need to pass on to, for example, like the hiring manager. So let's say that like they look at 200 of the CVs if it's like a big tech and you have like a lot of people applying. And again, like the way that they pick those 200 CVs is based on like how the company is sorting that out on their side. So it could be based on like relevance. It could be based on like when someone applied for the role. So those are things completely outside of our control. Like we can't control if our CV is going to be seen or not. So what we need to start doing is try to get in front of the recruiter the most we possibly can. So like how can we make sure the recruiter actually looks at our CV? And if we have a good CV, because like that's a foundation of your application, then it's much more likely they're going to call you for an interview. So the way that you get in front of the recruiter is not just by applying and then running away and then being like, okay, I'm going to wait for my confirmation email. It's like you need to go after them. So you need to go after the recruiter. You need to go after the hiring manager. And very importantly as well, you need to go after people that can advocate for you inside the company. Because recruiters and hiring managers, like they have a certain amount of time they're willing to put into like talking to people. And like they know they're going to have a lot of people messaging them on LinkedIn specifically. So yeah, one thing that you need to make sure that you're doing is also connecting with people inside the company that have time to talk to you and can advocate for you immensely. So those are like people working in the same department as you. So for example, if I apply for a marketing manager position, I'm going to be contacting other marketing managers, like be asking them, talking to them about like their experiences, like how they got into this position, because it's also good to have those people in your network. Like you don't want to go to them and be like, oh, can you give me a referral? Because people don't know you and like people are not going to give referrals to people they don't know. So you need to try to build a personal relationship with them. And this is what's really important. So the more people you can get inside the company that are like an opening door for you to get like your CV through and your application through, the more likely it's going to be that you're going to get picked. And again, if you get looked over and your CV is good, then you're going to go to the next stage. And the other thing as well is like this hidden job market that we always talk about, where like recruiters right now, they're not just waiting for people to apply for the role. Like I talk to a lot of recruiters and a lot of them say like, I don't even post jobs anymore because they know the moment they do, they're going to have like 5,000 people applying for it, 5,000 people messaging them on LinkedIn. So they're choosing to handpick and go after candidates one by one and basically be looking on LinkedIn, like who would be a good fit for this role, even if the person's not looking for a job, because like people can be miserable at the jobs. So they're like looking for and scouting like people that they are messaging and like could be a good fit to jump on a call and then could be like a potential for like an interview. So it's much more like a proactive approach on the recruitment side than like being reactive and just waiting for applications. So people need to take that into account and like optimize their LinkedIn profile so they can be found, because it's not a matter of like coincidence of like who's the recruiter messaging. Is like it's very tactical. So you need to like optimize your profile in order for you to be found. So it's the same thing as like a search engine works. Like you need to optimize for keywords so then Google ranks your website higher. So it's more or less the same principle.
Yeah, and to add on that, like, for example, that's how I got my current role at my company. So as I mentioned, I got laid off from the big tech early 2023. And I was applying, I managed to get interviews, but then there was just so many things getting stuck because of how uncertain the market was at that time. And so the way that I actually got my current role was that I was posting on LinkedIn. So I made it very open or very known that I was currently looking for a role. And then a recruiter reached out to me, the recruiter that helped me get this job. And he reached out to me and we actually just had more of like a casual conversation. He was more like, okay, like what have you done so far? What are you looking to do next? You know, what kind of company do you see yourself being in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at that time, there was actually not a RevOps role open. So there was no RevOps role that I could apply to. And I remember he was like trying to corner me. He was like, yeah, like you should be an account executive. Like you're so good at speaking. Like that pitch was great. Like you should consider account executive. I was like, I've done that already. Like, you know, I've kind of built my experience now in RevOps. I could see myself doing it one day, but for the near term, like I kind of want to stay in RevOps. And then he was like, yeah, you should do channel partnerships. Have you ever thought about that? And I just kept saying like, you know, I appreciate this, but like I'm really looking for like RevOps. So I thought the conversation was going to be done after that. And then like 2 weeks later, he reaches back out to me and he's like, yeah, okay, so, you know, we finished our planning for H2 2023. And we've decided to prioritize RevOps role. And so we'd love to put you in the interview process. And I went back on their careers page and there was no RevOps job actually advertised. So that's a pure example of like, if I had just gone through like cold applications, which is actually what I had been doing for the couple of months before that, I probably would have, I would have never landed this role, or at least it would have taken me longer until they would have written a job description, until it would have been approved all the way up to the CEO, until they would have, you know, put it down. And then that means I would have been competing with like 200 other applicants. Whereas I'm pretty sure like probably in the interview process, there was me and just a few other candidates. And so that's why I was able to speed up the process so much and land a job so quickly. So that's like a personal story, which, you know, sometimes people think that, you know, the hidden job market is kind of a myth, but like it's genuinely very true. And then also to add to what Joanna was saying about networking, like I think people's mindset needs to be very like a little bit more open when it comes to networking, because sometimes people feel like this networking is like, oh, I'm just taking from people. Like what is really the odds of me reaching out to somebody and say, hey, can you help me land a role? And they're actually going to help me. It's all about how you approach it. And like, as Joanna said, like the aim of networking is to build relationships. Like forget about the job and forget about how badly you want that referral. Just literally open a conversation and just generally have like a learning mindset of like, okay, what's it like working at your company? You know, what's the day-to-day like? You know, what makes a person stand out? Like forget about always that end goal being like, okay, I need to land the role, because then you can kind of like, somebody can feel on the other side of the room like, okay, are you actually just trying to get something from me, or are you genuinely trying to build that relationship? Because even long term in your career, like your network is your net worth. So whether they end up helping you get that role or not, like in 2-3 years, you don't know if that person's still going to be able to help you or not. And also there's just tons that you can learn from just having a conversation. So I think that's also very important. I think sometimes, you know, even like our clients, when we speak to them, they're just like, yeah, but like they didn't, you know, I wasn't able to get a referral from them, et cetera, et cetera. But like not every single conversation that you aim for should always just be about getting the job. It should just be about genuinely building connections where you're gaining value, and then, you know, the job is like a cherry on top, essentially.
Yeah, I feel like your Instagram, your TikTok, your social media does a great job of highlighting what you should have on your CV and what you shouldn't have. And so I've just come up with a quick addition called the Job Seeker Red Flag, Green Flag. So if you can just quickly give me your answers to what you think about these questions. So you've applied for a job, you've gotten through the interview round, and you've just heard radio silence. It's been weeks and they still haven't gone back to you. Is this a green flag or is this a red flag?
I think that's a red flag, personally. Like, I think it's a red flag, but I think there's ways you can kind of navigate that situation. I think whenever you're speaking to a recruiter in that first round, you should be asking the recruiter, like, okay, how long on average does it take to make decisions in between stages? You know, what's the best mode of communication? Because some companies just genuinely do take longer, like especially, for example, big tech companies. When I was interviewing with them, sometimes it takes them up to 2 to 3 weeks to make decisions as to whether they're going to put you to the next stage. And then other companies might take a few days or a couple of hours. So obviously, if you're used to interviewing where it takes them up to 2 days to make a decision and now it's taking a couple of weeks, you're going to be a little bit stressed out. But I mean, you can avoid that by being very transparent about the recruiter, like, what's your favorite mode of communication? You know, how long does it take? You know, like kind of at least setting your expectations. Now, if it's taking like weeks, like 4 to 6 weeks, and they're not responding to you at all, then I think it's a red flag, just because, especially if it's especially if you've gone up to like the second or third interview stage, which is like, okay, you've already built a relationship with them, you've spent time interviewing, then yeah, I think it's a little bit of a red flag. But if it's like 1 to 2 weeks, then that's
Sometimes
something that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing as well that I love asking at the end, if there's anything concerning them about my application, because like if they say like very big things of like skills I don't have or things like that, like you can kind of paint the picture of like, okay, maybe I'm not the best fit for this role. And you can also use that in your follow-up email, for example, like, because usually if they haven't replied to you, like after 3-5 days, like you can send a follow-up email just saying like, yeah, I'm still interested about the role. And then you can address like some of the concerns that they have, which might be like a blocker for them of putting you through to the next stage.
Yeah, definitely. I tend to hear that a lot with people that are applying for jobs and not hearing back. They feel like they're being ghosted. They don't know how to manage the process. But thank you so much for the insight. I feel like time has flown by. You've given so much insight. I wanted to know where people can find you on social media.
Yeah, so we have our Instagram account, which is TechTalk UK. We're also on LinkedIn, so Joana and Roxanne if you want to find us. But we have everything on our Instagram. So if you find us on that page, you can go anywhere from there.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for educating us on the future of tech and how best we can put our applications out there and what to expect. So thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
I'll put an alarm just so I can try to. Welcome to the Women in STEM podcast. This is a podcast where we focus on everything career